Welcome, everyone. We are going to wait for a few seconds to let everyone into the virtual room, and then we will start the webinar. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. We are just taking a few seconds to let everyone join the virtual room, and then we will start the webinar in a couple of seconds. I see numbers are still going up, but now I think we will jump into the topic. So welcome everyone to the OECD's 5th Roundtable on cities and regions for the Sustainable Development Goals. Greetings from not very sunny Paris today. My name is Sujin Kim, and I am the Deputy Head of the division in charge of cities, urban policies, and sustainable development at the OECD. It is my pleasure to serve as your moderator for this first session out of 3 sessions that we will have together over the next 3 hours, during which we will do 3 things, rule of 3 today. So first, we will launch a brand new OECD policy paper called the Sustainable Development Goals as a Framework for COVID-19 Recovery in Cities and Regions. And this paper is based on a very interesting survey that the OECD and the European Committee of the Regions conducted together in 2021. So you will hear about that in a moment. Second, we will give you a sneak preview of the OECD Toolkit to implement a territorial approach to the SDGs, which draws key takeaways from the diversity of experiences across cities and regions. And third and finally, we will turn to the question of how to localize the SDGs through city-to-city partnerships and decentralized development cooperation, which is particularly important in those uncertain and troubled times on the international arena. So before we dive into this very rich program, let me recall 3 points of practical information. The first is that we are recording this webinar, and we will make it available on the webpage of our OECD program on a territorial approach to the SDGs over the next few days. So please do check out the link that will be shared in the chat. Second, we have, of course, several hundred registered participants and many more who will follow us on social media out there. So please do engage with us real time using the Q&A button in Zoom down here, and spread the word on Twitter as well using our handle, which is OECD_local with the hashtag SDGs. And third and final point, if you happen to have a technical problem, please use the chat function to contact our support team, who will do their best to help you. So now we can jump right into the new OECD policy paper, which is just coming hot off the press with the title, The Sustainable Development Goals as a Framework for COVID-19 Recovery in Cities and Regions. And here we are very privileged to have the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD with us today, so Mr. Yoshiki Takeuchi, who will give us the gist of the paper over the next 10 minutes. So DSG Takeuchi, thank you so much again for joining us today, and you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this 5th OECD Roundtable on Cities and Regions for SDGs. As has been said, today we also launched the OECD's new policy paper, the Sustainable Development Goals as a Framework for COVID-19 Recovery in Cities and Regions. Our discussion on this paper comes during difficult and turbulent times. When the SDGs were adopted in 2015, little did we imagine that 7 years later, the world would be battling a pandemic and a war in Europe. These two massive shocks have caused the tragic loss of too many human lives and have thrown so many plans off track. Today's report shows that just how important cities are in shaping the future and how they are faring. I would like to take this opportunity to warmly thank the European Committee of Regions for their excellent collaboration on the survey, which underpins this new policy paper. Let me touch on three main points from the paper. First, it highlights the importance of the SDGs in providing a common framework for action. 2/3 of our local and regional governments are already using the SDGs to shape or adapt recovery plans, policies, and strategies based on the 2030 agenda. In fact, 44% stated that they did not use the SDGs before the pandemic, but are planning to do so now. The SDGs are coming to fore in this recovery phase because they help cities to identify specific local priorities. For example, the city of Bonn has developed a sustainability strategy that uses the SDGs as a framework to set goals on clean and affordable energy, responsible production and consumption, and climate change. The SDGs also offer a powerful framework to align priorities and resources across national, regional, and local level of government. In Japan, for instance, the National SDGs Action Plan 2018 includes a pillar called Regional Revitalization, which provides financial support to 10 cities to implement local SDGs strategies. Finally, the SDGs provide a framework for cities to mobilize the private sector as well as civil societies and citizens. For example, the province of Córdoba in Argentina has worked with the private sector, academia, and civil society to develop a matrix that identifies synergies between SDG targets. As a result, partnerships were developed to use recycled and reusable materials to promote sustainable construction. This helps to meet SDG 12 on waste reduction, as well as SDG 11 on improving housing affordability and quality. A second point I would like to highlight is the importance of particular SDGs in recovery plans. The survey highlighted that local and regional governments are focusing in particular on tackling inequality, promoting clean energy, and rebuilding citizens' trust in their governments. To reduce inequality, almost 60% of cities and regional priorities prioritize the efficient delivery of social and community services for disadvantaged groups and equitable access to education. 1/3 of the cities and regions are considering shifting from fossil fuel to zero carbon sources and decarbonizing the built environment, such as houses, buildings, and district heatings, as the two most promising strategies to transition to cleaner energy production. And to strengthen citizens' trust in their government, 41% of cities and regions stress stakeholders' engagement in local and regional policy making as the most effective SDGs contribution. Yet, despite all these encouraging signs, the survey also revealed that some bottlenecks remain. My third point is the need for urgent action to tackle these. In particular, almost half of the cities and regions stated they were experiencing capacity gaps in terms of staff and skills, as well as funding gaps. We also observed that only half of the cities and regions reported that they had contributed to their national government's voluntary national review. This shows that we still have to improve coordination between different levels of governments on the SDGs. To tackle these things, the paper includes some concrete recommendations. First, the paper highlights the need to use the crisis to mobilize all actors. For example, to enhance the healthcare and home care services for disadvantaged groups, targeted education programs for unemployed, incentive the decarbonization of the built environment, and promote the production of cleaner zero-carbon energy, especially in the current international context of rising energy prices. To broaden local government engagement, local and regional governments could involve stakeholders more effectively in local and regional policy making through participatory budgeting or, let's say, town hall meetings. National governments could also strengthen their engagement with cities and citizens in the process of voluntary national reviews. This would help go beyond national averages to unpack regional disparities, facilitate multi-level dialogue, and ultimately encourage SDG monitoring on the ground. Second, it recommends boosting investment in training and capacity development programs to upskill staff and volunteers in the implementation of SDGs. Third, the paper suggests mainstreaming SDGs in budget process to ensure adequate resources to the 2030 agenda in the COVID-19 recovery phase. Cities and regions could also use sustainability bonds or contingency funds, leverage private sector funding, and expand the use of sustainable public procurement. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, through their responses to the survey, local and regional governments from Europe and across the world have given us a cause for hope as we seek to shape a better future. But their responses also provide a call for action, as many needs to be done on our collective journey to achieve the SDGs. I am confident that the initiative analyzed in our paper will provide a source of inspiration for other local and regional governments to use the SDGs as an accelerator of recovery and resilience. Please be assured that OECD stands ready to support you every step of the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary General, for this very clear and comprehensive overview of the paper. As you told us, this paper does bring us some good news, since many cities and regions are using the power of the SDGs to shape this transformation towards a greener and more inclusive future. But as you recall, there is still a long way to go, and our window of opportunity in what was called the decade of action is in fact closing every day that passes. So this is kind of homework for all of us to tackle over the next few years now. And now I would like to take a moment to discuss how governments at all levels and other institutions can use the findings of this paper in their everyday life. And so I am delighted to welcome three panelists who will each bring a different perspective to the table. So we will hear from Mr. Ricardo Rio, who is Mayor of Braga in Portugal. You are also part of the group of the OECD Champion Mayors for Inclusive Growth, and you are also rapporteur on the SDGs in the European Committee of the Regions, with whom the OECD has conducted this joint survey that underpins the paper. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank again the Committee of the Regions for this excellent partnership. Second, we will hear from Mr. Guillaume La Fortuna, who is Vice President and Director of the Paris office of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, the SDSN, which has, I believe, 3 offices, including one in Paris. So welcome, Guillaume. And we will then hear from Gulnara Roll, who is Regional Advisor from the Forests, Land and Housing Division in the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, the UNECE. So thank you so much to all 3 of you for joining us today. I will start with Mayor Ricardo Rio. So as we heard from the DSG, the paper highlighted, some of the innovative initiatives that are taken by cities and regions to use the SDGs in their recovery strategies. But there were also a number of challenges we heard, be it financial challenges or capacity gaps, institutional silos. And so I was wondering, to what extent do you recognize the experience of your own city, Porto, in these challenges, in these opportunities, and also the ways forward that we just heard about? And how do you think you could perhaps use some of the recommendations that we put forward in our paper? The floor is yours, Mayor Rivera.
Well, good morning all. First, and thanks for the invitation. My city is Braga, not Porto, very close to Porto indeed, but the third biggest city in Portugal. Also a special word of recognition for all the work that OECD has been developing together with the European Committee of the Regions and many other institutions in this framework. It has been a very fruitful collaboration in the last months, and especially in the difficult circumstances that we had to deal with in the pandemic crisis, but still with the leadership of Stefano Marta and many others, we had the opportunity, for instance, to develop a very interesting survey on the local authorities. And I think that was a very good contribute for all this paper that has just been presented. Also, the European Committee of the Regions has published an opinion in which I was the rapporteur, which also tried to address the same topics and to enhance the different perspectives that we have to value in the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goals. The first one is that we need to look at it, and this panel is a good example of that, as it brings representatives from many dimensions and many levels of the public government to look at it as a subsidiarity approach. It's not something that is at European Union's level or some global institutions level. It's not something for the national governments. It's not something that can only be addressed by the local authorities. We have to complement each of our initiatives and to try to allocate the responsibilities, the resources, and the capacity of fulfillment of these goals in each of these levels. And to do so, it is also very important that it's not so concentrated at the national level, and that we really have some commitment with the territorialization of the SDGs, as we have proved, and OECD has also developed a couple of studies in that if we don't engage the local authorities, it will be very hard to fulfill most of the goals, because over 60% of the goals need the engagement of the local authorities. And that's not only because they have the power of decision, but it's because they have a very important resource, which is the capacity to mobilize and to involve all the local institutions, all the local stakeholders, the citizens themselves, as to fulfill all of these goals. And therefore, one of the crucial dimensions of the public policies at the continental, global, or national level has to be to strengthen the capacity building of the local authorities, so they can obviously develop their initiatives towards the fulfillment of the goals. Also, there is also important to say that we don't have, we shouldn't do it on a, let's say, casuistic base. When we talk about the fulfillment of the SDGs in specific territories, we look at just one initiative that addresses a specific goal. One of the things that I enhanced, in my opinion, was that the SDGs have to be an holistic approach, a strategic approach in which you engage all the areas of the government, so that everything is connected, and that we obviously take the best advantage of each of the policies towards the fulfillment of all the goals. And if we do so, we have a framework of work, and we have the opportunity to bring that strategy to specific initiatives, and also to allow the assessment of how we are progressing in the fulfillment of the goals. Here in Portugal, we had two initiatives that were very interesting, that were led by universities, the Catholic University with CESOP Local, also this with the local ODS, the SDGs, which engaged the university, the academic framework, to try to assess the fulfillment of the goals by a certain number of cities that are engaged in each of these networks. And this allows that every single year we have a report, a sustainability report, in which we see how we have been progressing. And that is a very important tool, not only for the policymakers, so that we can identify the lacks that we have and the things that we need to progress more, but also for the citizens as a whole, as this is also a way to enhance the accountability of the work that we are doing, and obviously to strengthen that commitment to specific areas that need obviously their engagements. And I think that also having this capacity to monitorize and to show how we are progressing is very important. That was why, for instance, my municipality of Braga, not only started producing our own sustainability report, but also we have tried to link all the planning and the budget in process of the municipality towards the fulfillment of the goals, so that we can see and that we can show how each of the resources that we are investing are connected with the fulfillment of a specific goal. And I think that's something very important. And it was also mentioned, in my opinion, in the European Committee of the Regions, when I suggested that the European semester, the major framework of the policymaking at European Union level, should also be linked, as it is said that it will be now, with the Sustainable Development Goals in the European level, in the national level, and then in each of the territories. And my final remark is obviously that it's very important to share experiences and to show best practices. And I think that that's something that can be very useful, and not only the OECD, but other networks like UCLG, Eurocities, and the European Committee of the Regions itself have been trying to show. URBACT as well has a specific project in which Braga is engaged to show the best practices at the European level, engaging cities from almost every single country, to see how each of the cities is working and how we can share our experiences with the other cities, because we need to lead by example, and it is very important to establish this type of contact and to strengthen the contact between each of the cities in this area as well.
Thank you so much, Mayor Rio, for underlining the importance of this shared task, this shared responsibility across levels of government, and really the relevance of multi-level governance and collaboration, because as you said, this is not really a task that any level of government can tackle on its own. And the SDGs do have this power of being, holistic and strategic to connect the different dots across different actors. I was very interested to hear about this monitoring framework, the sustainability report that you have developed in Braga, and I think it's a very interesting tool, to track progress, but also, I guess, as you said, to build this sense of buy-in and ownership from citizens at large. And I think it's a very inspirational example that might also, encourage other cities to do the same and to walk in this path. So thank you again, Mayor Rio. I will now turn to Guillaume La Fortuna, who, as we said, is the Vice President and Director of the Paris office of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which is, I believe, a nonprofit initiative that really aims to help implement the SDGs through a number of tools, such as education and research, but also policy analysis, and also this global cooperation. So, Guillaume, I was wondering, because the SDSN has worked, for the past 10 years on helping the different actors on the ground implement the SDGs. So when you were, listening to this diagnosis presented in the new OECD paper, I'm sure there are many things that resonated with your own experience and what you have seen at the network. And so I was wondering, what would you say perhaps to the cities and regions that are listening to us today in terms of perhaps the factors of success that they can best harness, and also how they can use the recommendations from the paper to develop further their initiatives to localize the SDGs. The floor is yours.
Right. Thank you so much, Sujin. And first of all, let me also start by congratulating the Secretariat, Sujin, Stefano, and all the team that has worked on this really excellent policy paper and the survey. I read it with really great interest. I guess, to pick up also on some of the points that were made by DSG Takeshi and also by Mr. Rio, the mayor of Braga, I think there's two findings that really caught my attention and that resonated to me. So one is the importance at this stage in the SDGs to really connect the planning process, the data work with the budgets and resource allocations. This is something that I think is important at obviously the subnational level, and this is something also where we do a lot of work at the national, at the country level to connect the distances to target the planning, but also the budget aspect. The second one is the question around skills, capacity building, and the role of science and the science policy interface. I mean, I guess SDSN being a global network of researchers and scientists mobilize for actions on the SDGs. This is something that is obviously very, very important, and I think it's very crucial to continue to document the best practices on how universities, research centers can support decision makers, but also how decision makers can connect with universities and researchers in the region. So I think this report is very useful and is framing those questions in a very good way. At SDSN, obviously, we are absolutely convinced of the crucial role of local and regional entities in order to implement the SDGs, and in the context where we're facing multiple crises, health, security, climate, in restoring and accelerating SDG progress globally. We advocated before the SDGs were even adopted with many of you in the room for a specific SDG on cities, SDG 11. We've worked over the years on guidelines and monitoring systems with many of you. Our local networks of researchers and scientists are also very much involved in identifying solutions and supporting SDG-aligned policies and so on. And actually, we have also a survey that we do, which is relatively similar to what you're doing at the OECD, where we look at this from the national perspective in terms of how the SDGs are being integrated at the national level. And we obviously have a global focus. So, the OECD approach of looking at how SDGs are being integrated in public management systems and practices is very much connected to a lot of the things that we do. And we're going to update those results in the Sustainable Development Report 2022, which will come out in early June. To just looking ahead, I mean, I think it's been mentioned several times that we're really facing a number of crises, which are major setbacks for this agenda. And so I think we're going to have an important meeting in 2023, which is at the second time heads of state will meet at the SDG summit to discuss where we are standing and also future priorities. And I think in this context, we hope that this meeting can be a big moment to recognize that we're off track, but also identify the major priorities in order to restore and accelerate SDG progress globally. And I think in this context, I think it will be important to and I'll emphasize 3 points here. First, to recognize, obviously, the crucial role of cities and regions to restore and accelerate SDG progress. And especially in the context where a lot of the investments, the financing will be channeled through subnational entities, those, recovery plans, recovery funds. I think, this level of analysis is becoming absolutely crucial in the context of multiple crises. The second point is, there's a lot of, the picture is rather gloomy. What we will show in the SDR 2022 is that over the past 2 years at the global level, not making progress anymore on the SDGs. That was already the case last year. And I think in this context, it's important to recognize that we're off track, but also to show some of the positive aspects as well. So to continue to document, and recognize our champions in this agenda, whether it's countries, municipalities, regions, best practices in terms of leveraging the science policy interface, but also some of the innovative approaches that emerged through the crisis, including, and I'll give just one example, in the use of new data systems and partnerships, and many of them actually occurred also at the subnational level to target intervention. So focusing on the negative, but also having, continuing to document some of the positive aspects so that we can sort of scale up, some of the initiatives done by some of the champions and the innovations in the 7 years we will have looking ahead. And then a final point, which I think is particularly relevant in the context of OECD countries, is maybe to have an emphasis also, and you mentioned it, Sujin, in your intervention, on the sort of the global responsibility of cities and subnational entities in terms of development cooperation, and more largely in terms of spillovers that might be generated through policy interventions, whether spillovers within the country on other regions, but also internationally. And I think this is something where, the fact that Sweden has recently adopted a consumption-based, or is planning to adopt a target on consumption-based impacts and CO2 emissions, might open up a new stream of work to document on the data side and policy side how can subnational entities act on those spillovers. So I'll stop here. And again, major congratulations to the Secretariat for a phenomenal report.
Thank you so much, Guillaume, for those very valuable, insights. I think it's very interesting what you said, in terms of how the COVID-19 pandemic did, accelerate some positive aspects as well. I'm thinking of, things like digitalization or greater awareness of environmental issues, but it did also set back part of the progress that had been achieved in the past. And so now we are in a situation where, tracking our progress on the SDGs should not just be about numbers or indicators. These numbers should feed into our policy decisions, and including budgeting decisions, as you rightly pointed out. And this is where I guess this interface between, academics, researchers, policymakers, and really all the different stakeholders engaged in this approach, comes in. And this is something that is really, shared across all our cities and regions and countries, a shared responsibility. So thank you again very much, Guillaume. And we might have some time left, to come back to some of those points, including with the questions that our participants might have for all of our speakers in session 1. So in this first round of interventions from our panelists, I will now turn to Ms. Gulnara Rol, Regional Advisor from the Forests, Land and Housing Division in the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, the UNECE. So welcome again, Gulnara, and thank you so much for joining us. So I guess the UNECE has also done a lot of work on strengthening the economic resilience of cities to learn from the lessons of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also build this capacity of cities and regions to anticipate and also to address major shocks like that in the future. And so I was wondering perhaps if you could tell us how you see the role of the SDGs as a framework and as a transformative power, in building this capacity to be resilient in cities. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sujin, and thank you so much for the invitation for this roundtable. I would like to congratulate you on this report on the SDG as a framework for the COVID-19 recovery in cities and regions. I represent the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, which is an intergovernmental organization, and historically we were really working with the national governments, but we really see the ever-growing role of local regional governments in achieving the SDGs. And this is why, for instance, our Committee on Urban Development, as its first day of the committee session, now has convened Forum of Mayors, which actually brings mayors to discuss between themselves issues of how the city is achieving the SDGs, but also to connect the cities to the national level and also to the international level. So I think this is very, very important. The paper is really rich. So I think there are lots of issues that can be discussed, and we're using already a lot to inform also the local governments with who I'm working. And I think the connection between the post-COVID recovery and the SDGs, which is highlighted in the paper, is a very important one. And I would like also to say that it's very much confirmed by what is being discussed at the Forum of Mayors at the UNEC, for instance. So as the first Forum of Mayors, mayors adopted a Geneva Declaration where they actually specifically requested to place the SDGs at the center of the recovery efforts. So really these two processes are very much connected. One of the important connection points between the achieving the SDGs at the local level and building the local resilience, definitely inclusiveness of cities, the promoting equal rights and participation of all groups of the population, especially the vulnerable groups. And definitely the pandemics highlighted, we saw that pandemic highlighted the need to support vulnerable groups. We saw the heroic efforts by the mayors, by the city governments, how they were supporting homeless people, people living in informal settlements, women, young group, unemployed. This was, I think, one of the really findings of the pandemics. And as a result, not only at UNEC, but also in many international organizations, we started to work much more on addressing the needs of vulnerable groups. For instance, at UNEC, we were working now much more on informal settlements. I think before the pandemic, that was a topic which was felt a bit more sensitive. But during the pandemic, I think there was a much more mature understanding of the need to work with homeless, with informal settlements. So UNEC developed a COVID-19 recovery action plan for informal settlements. And we are working now with a number of the IFIs, also with the city development program in Central Asia, for instance, on investment programs to transform informal settlements. One of the pilot projects is taking place, for instance, in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. So I think this is a very important development which pandemic brought us, but again highlighted this notion of the 2030 agenda, not leaving anybody behind and really promoting the social economic cohesion at the city level. Secondly, I think what already panelists mentioned, the importance of bringing the local national governments. I think this is something which has to be priority in our work in the recent future. It's not easy for local governments, especially in countries with economies in transition and developing countries, actually to deal with their everyday work on reconstructing after the pandemic, and also to maintain a very systematic cooperation and coordination with the national government. We just organized our second Forum of Mayors, which was took place on 4th and 5th of April. It brought together over 500 people in person and online, with 43 mayors speaking at the forum. And I think one of the success factors was exactly that it brought together local governments with their own national government, but also with the national governments from other countries, but also it plugged in the cities into much stronger into the United Nations multilateral decision-making framework. And we're really working in that direction to strengthen that cooperation. So we really hope for further engagement. And I would like to use the opportunity to thank OECD for help with organizing of the forum, because OECD was also part of the steering committee. So also this paper, actually one of the important background documents for the forum and its side events on the voluntary local reviews. Finally, the Deputy Secretary General mentioned voluntary national reviews and the role of the cities engaging in voluntary national reviews. We see multiple cities in the UNEC region working on the voluntary local reviews, which provide important input into this voluntary national reviews. I think it's very, very important because it provides this nuanced approach, but also strengthens the capacity at the country level to implement 2030 agenda and achieve the SDGs. So again, the VLRs is an important tool to strengthen cooperation between national and local governments and also the United Nations. But what is important is that VLRs should not be just a reporting document to the United Nations. So we just elaborated guidelines for the development of voluntary local reviews in the UNC region. And our approach is really that VLRs must be part of the city planning process. It has to be part of the rebuilding after the COVID-19 pandemic. And also, as the previous speaker said, it should be connected to the financing action, promoting the innovative financing towards achieving the SDGs, because we know there's a huge gap in achieving the SDGs still. And the participatory approach, community engagement definitely is very important. We also see the very big gap geographically between the capacities of the cities. While we see that in Western Europe, there is a very high capacities to developing the VLRs and also connecting to the VNRs. In Eastern Europe, Central Asia, there is still lacking capacities. So we're also working together with you as well, for instance, on the development of an online training modules and kind of organizing different training sessions. And I'm sure that this workshop as well will be an important opportunity for many cities also in Eastern Europe to connect and learn more about localization of SDGs. So thank you again for opportunity to be part of this discussion. And at UNEC, we also will be organizing more of these events. I think our key event will be in October. We will be having 83rd session of the Committee on Urban Development. It starts on the 3rd of October in San Marino. So I'm very happy to invite you also to join us and to continue discussion on the localization for SDGs also in San Marino. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gulnara, for those insights. I think it's very important, what you said about connecting the recovery process with the SDGs, and particularly this focus on the most vulnerable groups that you underlined, which were really hit extremely hard, if not the hardest, during this pandemic, and the effects of the current war in Ukraine are sure, likely to hit the most vulnerable again. Pretty hard in our cities and regions. So this focus on making sure that the most vulnerable groups are kept, under our close attention is extremely important. So thank you again very much. I know we have one question in the Q&A that is more for the OECD, so perhaps we will have a little bit of time at the end of the session to come back to it. A question which was about considering, the value of achieving the SDG goals from the EU taxonomy. So we'll see if we have a little bit of time at the end of the session, if my colleagues from the OECD want to get back to it. In the meantime, since we have about 15 minutes left in this session, we can perhaps afford a second round with our three panelists to go back to some of the insights that they shared earlier. So I will perhaps go back to the Mayor of Braga, so Mayor Ricardo Rio, and particularly maybe if you can highlight the lessons from the experience of Braga, perhaps including in this collaboration between the local level and the national level. If there is one thing, from the experience of Braga in working with the Portuguese national government that you would like to share with our participants very briefly, that would be great.
Well, I would say that the example that I can share is the example that we shouldn't follow. Actually, in Portugal, there is not so big coordination between national level and local authorities for the fulfillment of the goals. One of the issues that I stressed, for instance, in my opinion, was that we didn't have the commitment for instance, in the national resilience and recovery plans that were developed at the European Union level, the national authorities didn't link those plans to the assessment on how the goals will be fulfilled. As I mentioned, for instance, at local level, the link between the budget and the planning and the goals as well. And I think that that is something that we need really to improve. The opportunities of collaboration that we had here in Portugal have been much more at local level in different cities, at the local level with other stakeholders. I mentioned the two examples of the universities with ODS local that is also mentioned in the chat, but also with CESOP local, and the specific partnerships that we have for each of the areas of the goals. Just to give you two brief examples that are connected, something that was mentioned by other speakers. For instance, in terms of inclusion, we are one of the cities that has hosted many refugees from Ukraine, even if we are in the other side of Europe and very far away of this war. But to do so, we had to collaborate with many institutions in the city so that we could provide all the requirements and all the specific needs of the refugees in terms of inhabitation, in terms of job opportunities, in terms of the integration of kids in the schools, in terms of health provision. And that was very important to have this framework of collaboration right from the start and not after the arrival of the refugees. So when we brought the first refugees to the city and we sent a couple of buses to collect people in the borders of Poland and Romania, we already knew what we will be available to provide them when they will arrive to our city. In other field, for instance, that is very decisive for our city and for the world, the climate action, we are developing a lot of investments and a lot of initiatives that are connected with sustainable mobility. And for instance, we are creating what we call the mobility corporate plan, in which we challenge the companies from Braga to develop specific initiatives to stimulate their workers to have good options of mobility, either using the public buses or sharing their vehicles or using bikes or any other sort of initiative that will obviously help us to have a better mobility in the city and to reduce the carbon emissions that arise from mobility, which are the main factor in terms of the development of our city in this area. And so we are always looking for this type of collaboration, which is one of the goals itself, the establishment of partnerships towards the goals, but also to, in each of the areas, try to bring the best of each of the stakeholders for the fulfillment of the goals. And if we have that capacity in the local level, it is really a pity that we don't have more collaboration with the national government in this area as well.
Mm. Yeah, thank you so much, Mayor Ricardo Rio. I know there's a follow-up question for you in the Q&A. If you would like to perhaps type directly, you know, in the Q&A, if you have any insights to bring. I think it's a question about the specific initiative that could be applied in Portugal. So that would be great. And then we have two more questions in the Q&A. One, which is about, you know, how cities can increase participatory initiatives, including participatory budgeting, and if there are, you know, signs of successful uptake of these participatory budgets. And then another question about how can we bridge international donor finance with SDG review efforts, and if there is, you know, a prioritization for voluntary local reviews for the cities that are engaging in this effort. So I am going to turn to both Guillaume and Gulnara to see if they would like to take perhaps one of those questions, one about participatory initiatives and the other one about the voluntary local reviews and the incentives for that. Guillaume, you would like to take one of those?
Happy to jump in, Sujin. And on the specific examples, I think there might be other speakers on the participatory budget process in cities. What I can say on our side on the first question is that at the national level, because we've been tracking this over the years, usually some of those participatory processes are often one-offs, so they're not always sort of permanent features, and usually those one-offs are around the preparation of the VNRs, which I guess, you know, you might face similar findings at subnational levels as well. The second thing is, you know, it's one thing to obviously leverage citizens' inputs. It's another thing the way these are being integrated in the end. And I think, you know, there's been a lot of discussions in France on how some of those participatory processes have led to. So that's another findings. One thing that we're doing more and more, and where we see a lot of let's say dynamism, is in terms of the work we're doing with, you know, the public representation, including parliaments, for instance. So just to mention one example, obviously in the European Parliament, there is a group of parliamentarians specifically mobilized around the SDGs, this SDG alliance, and SDSN and this alliance are working very closely together. But in general, we see parliaments being more and more, let's say, mobilized around this agenda. That's the trend that we see at the global level. On financing, that's for us at SDSN the major topic this year. It was priority number 2 of the UN Secretary General when he spoke to the General Assembly in January 2022. So after dealing with COVID, priority number 2 on the SDGs was around financing. I think the bottom line here is that if we don't get the financing right, there is no chance that we can restore and accelerate SDG progress by 2030 and beyond. As DSN, we work in the global context. Obviously, in many European countries, OECD countries I finance extra, either emergency outlays or recovery plans through debt. Many countries around the world have not been able to tap into markets because they cannot borrow on affordable borrowing terms, either because they have no credit ratings or because they pay interest rates of 8, 9, 10%. And by the way, in this context, I think, and this is something that connects, I believe, with the subnational level as well, there's been a huge growth of the sustainability themed bonds market, essentially, which can be connected also, I think, to this issue of, issues around access to financing, especially in lower and lower middle income countries. So we've seen the emergence of innovative investment instruments, including SDG bonds, right? So we work closely with one of those countries, Benin, for instance, and we see this, the market is doubling at the sovereign level in 2020, 2021. We see also this picking up a lot at the subnational level. To the question in the chat, I think this is exactly right. Hopefully what we can achieve in the coming years is a better connection between access to financing and the quality and robustness of basically sustainable development plans, right? With the idea that if the right set of investments are being done, either at the subnational level or country level, this increases growth potential because you will invest in the right set of infrastructure, services, and so on. And then that means that it increases your capacity to borrow, in which case that could also lead to greeniums on the interest rates paid by countries or by cities or regions. So I'll stop here, but I think this topic is an absolute crucial one. And for sure at SDSN, we are doing a lot on the topic, and we'd love to work with all of you in OECD countries, but also on the global scale as well, where this is also a major issue.
Thank you so much, Guillaume. I think about the participatory initiatives. It's a question that emerges quite often, in terms of, sometimes consultation fatigue, because you have to manage expectations also on both sides. So if you are offering the possibility to engage citizens, you have to clarify, what will happen to the inputs that they're giving you and how they will be translated or not in the policymaking process. And it should not be just a tick the box type of initiative, but it does also require skills and capacities in the cities and regions and the governments as well. So point well taken. I wanted to turn to Gulnara to see if you wanted to react to either the participatory issue or the financing issue. I see there are more questions coming up in the Q&A as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Sajin. I think that this question about bridging international donor finance with local city projects, it's something where we have quite a lot of practical experience. We're now, for instance, implementing exactly recovering from COVID-19 pandemic project in 16 cities across the globe with 5 regional commission, UNCD and Habitat, and also working in many other cities on cooperation projects. So I think that first of all, the city projects need to be connected to SDGs, and this is why the VLRs are very important. So as soon as you connect the city project with the specific SDGs and targets, it actually has a much more value for the donor and for international organizations which can provide resources. So I think that's in a way one answer already in the question. Secondly, what is our experience is that that there is a gap actually between the funding which is available with international donors and between the project ideas which exist with the cities. Of course, this is not the case in the big cities with big resources, but in many cities in economies in transition, this is what we find, that there is a big need, and this is what we are trying also, this is what we're working also to try to help cities to bridge this gap, to really help to develop these project ideas, to bring them into the discussion with the IFIs. And this gap actually is really big. So it actually requires support of, I think, many more organizations, because we still underestimate the lack of capacity in some of the cities to developing this kind of project, because there are lots of ideas, there are lots of needs, but very many of them are not realized. And not because there are no problems, but simply there is lack of organizations still who are helping to transfer cities these ideas into the projects, which could be already bankable.
Yes, indeed. So there's a definitely potential to scale up those innovative ideas if there was, this right match between the initiatives, the projects, and the donors. Indeed. Just going back to the Q&A. So I think we have maybe 1 minute to go back to the Mayor of Braga in terms of the question that was asked in the Q&A about the application of a specific initiative, ODS Local.
Yes, as I mentioned in my prior interventions, we have two major projects here in Portugal, which are coordinated by universities. ODS Local, it's one of those. Then the other is CESOP Local, also from the Catholic University. And they provide local voluntary assessments on the fulfillment of the goals, and they produce frequent reports on the progress that each of the cities that are participating can develop. And it's a very interesting tool with a large set of indicators that has been being developed not by the local authority. And that's one of the crucial elements, because these projects are working with the local authorities, but they are developed at these university centers. And so the lack of resources that usually the local authorities have to allocate to this type of initiative, which is for some considered a burden and in a certain sense a waste of resources, and I completely disagree with that, is very eased by the work of these university centers. And it's a very interesting project, this ODS Local, like the other one that I mentioned, and very useful. So for those that are not participating here in Portugal, I really recommend that they can participate in these projects, and also this can be replicated in the international level.
Thank you so much for this very concise answer. I will ask my OECD colleagues to, if they can, reply directly in the Q&A, maybe by typing, just to save us a little bit of time, on the two remaining questions, one on the EU taxonomy and another one, I believe, on the link between the SDG-led COVID recovery and the green action, climate action, as a follow-up to COP26. So if my colleagues can answer in the Q&A, that would be great, because we are now at the end of today's first session on the SDGs as a framework for COVID-19 recovery in cities and regions. This paper is now available at the link shared in the chat, and I hope you will find, much more inspiration in there. So I would like to thank again very warmly all our speakers, the DSG, of course, Mayor Ricardo Rio from Braga, Guillaume La Fortuna from the SDSN, and Gulnara Roll from the UNECE. Thank you so much for sharing, your time and your insights in a very open and candid way here. So we will now move on to the second session in this roundtable, which will be moderated by my colleague, Stefano Mata, coordinator of the OECD program on a territorial approach to the SDGs. Stefano, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sojin. Thank you very much for moderating this first session and for sticking to the time. I will do my best to follow your example. It's really my pleasure to moderate this second session that we call From Concept to Action, How to Implement a Territorial Approach to the SDGs. The aim of this session is really to explore how tools, guides, international example, and good practice can support policymakers at the local level in localizing the SDGs. In this session, we are also going to discuss the OECD draft toolkit to implement a territorial approach to the SDGs that we are currently developing. And my colleagues, Lawrence and Josh, will make a short presentation about that. So will also be the opportunity in the panel discussion to get your feedback on this ongoing toolkit that we are developing and to receive some suggestions on how to finalize from cities, regions, from UCLG, and so on. Before the panel discussion, we have a keynote speaker. So it's really my pleasure to introduce you as a person. Asa is the research director and the deputy director at the Stockholm Environmental Institute. And she's also a member of the independent group of scientists for the 2023 Global Sustainable Development Report. We know that also the Global Sustainable Development Report will focus on example case studies, including at the local level, to implement the SDGs. And in particular, Asa, given your role, it would be great if you can explain us which could be possible tools, in particular science-based tools that were mentioned also in the previous session by Guillaume from SDSN, to support the implementation of the SDGs at the local level. So Asa, you have the floor. You have 10 minutes, and please, you can start with your presentation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Stefano, and I hope you can all hear me well.
Yes, perfect.
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I really want to start with congratulating the OECD team on this toolkit and the policy paper and this whole network of cities and regions for sustaining this peer learning initiative and roundtable. I think persistence is really the key to success with the SDGs. So in this short presentation, I wanted to share a little bit from our preliminary thinking on the next GSDR, the big picture, global progress on SDGs, and then discuss a little bit kind of new scientific approaches, the science-based tools that you mentioned, and give a concrete example from my SEI colleagues' work, and finally offer to you some potential kind of emerging issues going forward with the SDG agenda. Starting with the big picture, and if you can please go to the next slide. I know you have an OECD localized indicator framework, which shows that the large majority of regions and cities in OECD countries are lagging behind. And this, of course, gives an indication also of the magnitude of the challenge globally in cities and regions in non-OECD countries. So at the global level, in the independent group of scientists, we're now compiling the data, the indicators, the trends to try and evaluate the progress on the SDGs. And it's a dire picture after the pandemic primarily, but now we are also facing the Ukraine war. So these listed here on the slide are some of the sort of specific trends that we are trying to somehow characterize the impact on the SDGs from. Next slide, please. And just to give you a snapshot, and some of this is based on scenario modeling, not actual data, we know that we have significantly slowed progress on poverty alleviation. We know we will carry with us a deficit on education, missed student years. We have already bounced back to pre-pandemic global CO2 emissions. And summing this up, significantly fewer countries are projected to reach SDG targets by 2030. Of course, this will depend on the ultimate impact of the pandemic and other big crises and events. And we could expect that many of these projections would hold also for cities and regions. Next slide, please. We're also looking into the emerging data on wealth inequality, which today appears higher and growing more quickly than income inequality. Wealth inequality can also be expected to influence cities and regions, both social sustainability and economic sustainability. Next slide, please. I mentioned the war in Ukraine, and this is something we are looking at, but also conflict more generally, more globally. This is both important, but also very unpredictable, of course. But studies have shown that a war, in this case, Yemen, can cause setbacks of decades when it comes to achieving human development goals, as well as causing much environmental destruction, in addition to the human tragedies and losses. But then, of course, we also have the cascading impacts, such as food security, high food prices, as well as impetus for change, what we are now seeing in terms of the calls to accelerate the energy transition. Next slide, please. And speaking of climate change, of course, another big trend that we see is this rapid adoption of long-term climate neutrality targets, or net zero targets globally. Almost 90% of global emissions are now covered, and increasingly cities and regions are adopting these targets. But what we see is that there's a pattern that these targets increasingly come with reporting mechanisms, they come with published plans for implementation, they come with interim targets in the near future, but what we are not yet seeing is clear accountability mechanisms. And I'll come back to this in the end. So these are some of the trends we're looking at for the GSDR, knowing that cities and regions are often quicker to act on both new risks and new opportunities, and arguably have a more natural, integrative way of thinking and working, making ends meet, working with smaller budgets, having to find smart, practical solutions. We think that cities and regions will indeed be even more important pioneers and agents of change as we move into the second half of Agenda 2030. Next slide, please. So as Stefano mentioned, the subnational level will indeed be very important in the GSDR in our analysis. We will look at how do cities and regions shape change, enable change, regulate change. Next slide, please. We plan to continue working with the 6 entry points to transformation that the previous GSDR used, and one of them was urban development. But we want to add an element of more looking at the dynamics of change. So how can we accelerate these change pathways? Can we think of S-curves across the SDGs, not just for technological development? Are we in emergence, acceleration, or stabilization phases of change? And what are the critical positive tipping points? And also what resistance to change can we actually anticipate? So we think that this kind of dynamic perspective could also play into policy recommendations, for example, when looking at the sequencing of policy tools. So when do you, for example, use innovation support? When do you use public procurement to create markets? When do you use information, public campaigns to start triggering new social norms, and also taxation to give clear economic incentives? Next slide, please. So on sustainability science, we already heard very good examples here on science-based tools. So this is really encouraging. We see that sustainability science has developed a lot in the last few years. The SDGs have triggered a wealth of methods and tools. And in this recent paper, one of the contributors to the GSDR, Cameron Allen, identified 22 types of science-based tools in these 4 categories listed here. But when he looked at the uptake of these tools in around 60 DNRs, he found that actually very few had used tools. When they had, it was mainly in that first category of monitoring and evaluating progress. So this suggests to me a very large untapped potential in how policy and practice can use these science-based tools. And I expect this goes for regional and city level governments too. So I would strongly encourage you to look at the science and use the local universities and science institutions to test some of these tools. And it was really interesting to hear about the example from Braga, working with the local universities. Science should be a public good serving Agenda 2030. Next slide, please. So just to give a concrete example of a science-based tools developed by my colleagues at the Stockholm Environment Institute. This is a tool for assessing interlinkages. It's called a cross-impact matrix tool. And it's a process tool where experts and stakeholders, and this can include local politicians, city officials, gather to systematically score interactions, positive and negative, between SDG targets. So it really reinforces the idea that the SDGs are indivisible, and the most important added value is that we consider them jointly and holistically when developing policy plans and business models. So this tool has been applied at EU level and also national level. It was, for example, used by the Swedish government for their 2021 VNR, and coincidentally, SDG 11 was seen as the most synergistic SDG, so the one which would have the most positive effects on other SDGs. Next slide, please. So the outcome you get from this exercise is one of these very colorful matrices that highlights the positive and negative interactions and the codependencies between SDGs. Last year, my colleagues here in Stockholm, they ran pilots with 6 cities in Sweden. And the key insights was that really process matters more than result here. It was a really useful tool to just gather people working in their ministries, different departments, to come together and share perspectives. They also found that at the subnational level, governments and other actors are typically more integrative in their thinking and development of policies and plans. Finally, that localized and internalized as sustainable development targets matter. Perhaps we don't need that explicit link to the SDG structure. I just wanted to quickly show also these couple of reports where OCI colleagues supported the UN in developing the Localizing the SDGs campaign, including doing a baseline study of 28 cities around the world to look at how they are implementing SDGs. Next slide, please. And the next one again. So to finish off, well, these are not necessarily new issues, but I think maybe they could have some renewed relevance as we move into the second half of the Agenda 2030 time period. We have been trying to look forward now also as we prepare for the Stockholm +50 UN meeting taking place in Stockholm in a month's time, which is a moment just both for commemorating global environmental governance over the past 50 years, but also looking forward. And it seems that maybe there could be a sort of tipping point or breakthrough when it comes to working on sustainable lifestyles, recognizing and the research really shows that it's not enough to rely on voluntary action or information such as eco-labels, but really cities and regions need to provide that enabling infrastructure for individuals to lead more sustainable lifestyles. And we see also from various surveys that there seems to be a willingness to also make adjustments to individual lifestyles, which of course fluctuates, but it's something to build on. Another topic, maybe looking more at accountability mechanisms for the SDGs. This we see very much in the climate debate around net zero targets. So multiple actors, both financial actors and the youth movement, are increasingly calling out governments, cities, regions, companies on whether they actually have delivery plans for their targets. Finally, youth certainly has become much more vocal in policymaking at many levels. And we think maybe the next step is to look even more at future generations and this concept of intergenerational equity. How can we think more long-term? Because really impacts of unsustainable development are increasingly visible here and now. How can we engage in these futuring exercises, reimagining the future? And finally, how can we operationalize these perspectives so that we really consider perspectives of future generations in our decision-making today? So those were some suggestions of some emerging issues. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Hasan. Thank you for this for the presentation and for these 3 suggestions on future areas of work. That we have 10 minutes for a Q&A with Hasan, and I already see one question in the chat. So we start with this. I also have some questions, but let's start with the participant. So the first question, Hasan, for you is how did you mobilize both national and local institutions to use those SDG synergy tools that you explained in the presentation?
I think the interest and curiosity for these tools came from different places. In some cases, the cities, the jurisdictions themselves. In some cases, from international organizations. But I think it has been a really interesting area where there is a genuine interest, curiosity to work systematically with the SDGs, because they do offer that very comprehensive framework. But as mentioned, what we have seen is that, of course, context matters very much. And for the GSER, we actually reviewed the literature. Can we learn anything around synergies and trade-offs, which SDGs are more synergistic than others? And it's very hard to generalize, and there are actually no clear results. So it really depends on the context you're in, and that's why it's so important that cities, regions, national governments sort of take ownership of these tools, apply them, and make them relevant to their particular context.
Thank you. There are many questions for you, both in the chat and in the Q&A. Then there are 2 that perhaps can be combined. One is which Swedish city did you work with to test your tool? And the second one is how, sorry, let me go back to this question. How can other cities in Europe test this tool?
Yes, great questions. We actually piloted this tool in 6 quite small cities. I think if we compare with some other cities represented here today, these are cities like Örebro, Flen, Luleå, if you know Swedish geography. But I think what my colleagues took with them from these exercises was exactly this insight, observation that in these small cities, the people are very used to thinking holistically, actually, and being practical. So maybe a little bit less of that sort of silo mentality, less of the turf war that you could get at higher levels of government, where sectoral actors are sort of very focused on their sectoral objectives. The tool is available, and actually, if it's possible to share the slides, you will find a link there. So I do encourage you to get in touch with my colleagues and discuss with them, but also, like we heard from Braga, and also I know SDSN possibly have tools. So there are many tools to choose from.
Thank you, Hasan. There are many other questions for you, so thank you for raising all this interest. The next one in the Q&A is, this is more linked to the 3 areas that you suggested at the end of the presentation as future possible areas of work. Are there any good example of accountability for SDGs to follow, and if so, which ones?
I don't know is the short answer. I would be very interested to learn from this group here today, so I will look in the chat. I've seen civil society, there's one campaign on SDG accountability. They did a global survey, and people have quite low trust, honestly, in governments at all levels being, taking real responsibility for the SDGs. So I think there's a large scope for improvement. I know there has been targeted work at getting national parliaments more engaged. I think we heard something about this here too. But I think we need to be creative, and what I think we could really work on is also this constructive accountability. So it's not just, you know, sort of naming and shaming, but really also giving platforms to the good examples, and also maybe thinking through how can we make whoever is in power and, you know, holds decision-making roles in 2030. Of course, we don't know, but how can we try to find ways that SDGs sort of matter across several political cycles?
Maybe a final question that is both in the chat and is also one that I would like to ask you is about the role of the university on to support government with the SDGs and with these science-based tools. You mentioned in one of the slides that there is an untapped potential of a science-based tool. Also in our program, one of the areas we are focusing on is how university and higher education institutions can support cities and regions in localizing the SDGs. There are already some good examples like Los Angeles or Bristol, where the university helped the city to develop the voluntary local review. So my question would be, how do you see this link at the local level between university, city in particular, and region? And which are the obstacles that you still see, given that, as you mentioned, there is still an untapped potential for the use of this tool for policy making?
Yeah, I'm really glad actually for that question. First of all, let me say that you mentioned some examples of really successful collaboration now. So maybe this is more of an untapped potential at national level, possibly. But I think one potential barrier could be just the way how science is set up, the incentives that scientists face, which is still very focused on, you know, publishing their papers and so on. We have seen actually a tenfold growth in the number of scientific papers on the SDGs. It's quite an exponential increase when you look at the scientific interest in SDGs. But so I think there is interest from the scientists. The universities typically have more expectations to have impact in society. They need to report on this. But what's lacking are these kind of incentives facing scientists. So I would think it would be super exciting if universities collectively, for example, could allow secondments of scientists to local governments or regional governments, maybe 1 or 2 days a week or during a period of time, just really to have those meeting places and share expertise. I think it's very important for scientists to learn about the practical realities and the actual knowledge needs, but also to share their methods and toolkits. So I think it's great we have more transdisciplinary projects and partnerships, but I think also secondments is a, you know, untapped potential tool.
Thank you. There are some other questions, but now we need to move to the panel discussion. There is, for example, one on the Q&A about how this tool can be used to resolve conflict within different political positions. And in the chat, there are some other questions for you. So if you want to answer directly in the chat or in the Q&A, or we can send you the question after. Thank you so much, Haza, because again, as you can see from the question, your presentation really raised a lot of interest. I think there are also a lot of inputs that we can take for our tool and for the next step of the development of the tool. So if you can stay for the panel, and then you will also want to interact with the speakers there, it would be great. So far, thank you so much again. Let me now move to the panel. The first part will be the presentation of the draft OECD Toolkit that we are developing currently in this period. The plan is to launch it at the World Urban Forum in a couple of months in Katowice. So now let me give the floor to my colleague Lawrence and Josh that will guide you very briefly in 8 minutes through this tool and through some of the key findings. And then we will open for a discussion, first with Emilia from UCLG and then from some cities and regions that are working with us on this. So Lawrence, you have the floor.
Thanks a lot, Stefano. So yes, as you mentioned, my colleague Josh and I are now going to present a short overview of the toolkit that Stefano just mentioned to implement a territorial approach to the SDGs that we're currently developing. As you can see on this slide, the final version of the toolkit will consist of 4 different sections. Part 1 summarizes the key takeaways on how cities and regions use the SDGs for policymaking. This section presents in particular the lessons learned from the 10 policy dialogues that we have conducted so far as part of our program on a territorial approach to the SDGs. Part 2 showcases a list of recommendations under each of the 5 pillars of the checklist for public action that we have published in 2020. The 5 pillars are policies and strategies, multi-level governance, financing and budgeting, data information and engagement. And then the second part will also provide an overview of around 50 good practices of how cities, regions and countries are already implementing those recommendations. And then the third part is a self-assessment framework, which will allow cities and regions to assess to which extent they are already following the recommendations of this OECD checklist for public action to localize the SDGs. And at the very end of the toolkit, we are currently preparing different 2-pager snapshots to illustrate with data and indicators how our pilot cities, regions, and countries are already progressing towards the SDGs. Next slide, please. So there is a wide range of lessons that have emerged from our policy dialogue so far with cities and regions from across the world. And if we look at the first pillar in terms of policies and strategies, for example, we experienced how the SDGs can help promote sustainable mobility and reduce air pollution while striving to reduce inequalities, such in the case of Bonn in Germany. We also saw that the SDGs can help combine urban green growth and inclusiveness. In the city of Kitakyushu in Japan, for example, the SDGs are used as a tool to explicitly link the environment with the social and economic goals, for instance, through eco-industry, offshore wind power generation, ecotourism and culture. And the city of Kitakyushu is really trying to use those interlinkages to attract the youth back to the city, to provide job opportunities for them, and also to promote social cohesion in the territory. The SDGs also help to manage trade-offs between different policy areas of the 2030 agenda, for example, between affordable housing, maintaining green spaces, and reducing greenhouse gas emission, which are all competing for similar spaces. Then another lesson learned from our dialogues was that the SDGs support functional approaches to sustainable urban development that go beyond municipal boundaries and don't stop at the administrative frontiers of cities. And others, such as the state of Paraná in Brazil, also use the SDGs to strengthen the linkages between urban and rural areas, and also to address inequalities within their region or within their state. Next slide, please. Lastly, the SDGs can also be used to elaborate regional development strategies. We here have, for example, the case of Southern Denmark and the Southern Denmark of the Future 2020-23 strategy, for example, that uses the SDGs as a holistic framework for regional development with a focus on resource optimization, including aspects like the circular economy and the utilization of alternative materials to minimize environmental impacts, all within the framework of the SDGs as a strategy to boost the development of the region. And others, like, for example, the province of Cordoba, use the SDGs as a tool to promote social inclusion with a focus on social inclusion, yet in a holistic way. Next slide, please. In terms of the second pillar on multi-level governance, we saw also how the SDGs provide an opportunity to improve the collaboration between different actors and levels of government. For example, in the case of Germany, they also can be a tool to strengthen the engagement of cities and regions in national processes. If we look at the example of Norway, for example, Norway's second voluntary national review that was published last year, for example, put a strong emphasis on the local and regional implementation of the SDGs. And on top of that, it was also developed by the Ministry of Local Government and Modernization in close collaboration with the Norwegian Association of Local and Regional Governments. So you can clearly see the collaboration between those different levels of government in that case of Norway. And lastly, the effective implementation of the SDGs also relies on policy coherence to fully reap the benefits of the 2030 agenda. And several pilot cities and regions we've been working with are fostering this holistic approach in their institutional frameworks to overcome policy silos, for example, in Kita-Kyushu in collaboration with the national government and the SDGs Future Cities program. Next slide, please. And then lastly, for the pillar 3 on financing and budgeting, we also saw that cities and regions start to mainstream the SDGs into their budgeting processes to ensure an adequate resource allocation for the 2030 agenda. For example, the city of Mannheim in Germany has involved its population in framing a vision statement and 7 strategic goals that are linked to the SDGs that are used as a basis for the budget planning of the city. And the city also integrates targets into those budget documents that it prepares, including SDGs indicators that relate to the 7 strategic goals that have been developed together with the population. And furthermore, cities and regions also start to mainstream sustainability criteria into their public procurement to achieve outcomes that are aligned with the SDGs. And after the first 3 pillars, now I'll hand over to Josh, who will present findings for pillar 4 on data and information and pillar 5 on engagement. So Josh, you have the floor.
Josh, you are muted. We cannot hear you, Josh. Josh, you are muted. Still muted. Try now. No, we cannot hear you. Can you try again? Otherwise, maybe Lawrence can eventually continue with the presentation. If you don't solve it, try. No, nothing. Okay, so maybe Lawrence, can you finish with the presentation? I'm sorry for Josh, but we cannot hear him.
Okay, sure. So, well, I'll go to a pillar 4 then on information and data, where on the left side you can see a graph that might be familiar to you, which is our OECD localized indicator framework for the SDGs, and it shows the achievements of regions in this case on the different SDGs, which illustrates that there is uneven progress across the different SDGs, with at least 80% of regions that have not achieved targets for any of the goals. For example, we see that no single OECD region has achieved the objectives for the SDG 13 on climate action or SDG 5 on gender. And the outcomes for cities are quite similar, where we see that at least 70% of cities have not achieved their targets for 15 out of the 17 goals. And of course, as in the other sections, we have also seen good approaches and best practices by different cities and regions to implement the SDGs and to use data and information to contribute to the SDGs. For example, regional SDG measurement frameworks like the state of Paraná in Brazil is developing both at the state level and also at the local level to have comparison and also to be able to illustrate those differences that I mentioned in terms of disparities between the territories. We have also the example of Kopavugu in Iceland that has developed an SDGs index, and in particular a system that links all the different data sources of the city, of the municipality, to have a one-stop shop for data that is also linked to the SDGs, and that provides useful information for the city's policy making, also shows progress developments over time. So these are 2 very good examples that we've seen in terms of how cities and regions can use data and information to contribute to the SDGs. And then on the next slide, which is the pillar on engagement, we see that there's a number of cities and regions that is trying to involve the private sector in the SDGs engagement, for example, the region of Southern Denmark that has concluded public-private partnerships between universities, cities, and private companies to foster really the SDGs in the private sector. We have seen the examples of Los Angeles and Bristol that have a close collaboration also with the universities that Stefano just mentioned before. For example, in Bristol, the University of Bristol was strongly involved in the preparation of the city's VLR. And then the last aspect is also to integrate youth and the civil society as important actors in the SDGs localization. We've seen, for example, a strong collaboration in Beacon with the Youth Council and also the civil society engaged in Kittek's SDGs Club. And now this is basically what I mentioned as the third part of our toolkit that we are developing, which is a self-assessment process that we're currently elaborating, which should allow cities and regions to assess how they are already contributing to the items of the checklist and to which extent they are implementing the recommendations from this checklist, which will consist out of 5 different steps that you see split into the preparation phase, the diagnosis phase, and the action phase, which we're currently developing, and especially building on a scoreboard. Where you can see, for example, the identification of a lead team that should lead the process, that should determine the objectives of the assessment and map the stakeholders, and then in collaboration with the stakeholders, organize workshops that can actually lead to a closer interaction between different stakeholders and the local government in order to provide a comprehensive assessment, and then as a last step to set up accountability mechanisms and develop action plans how the recommendations could be implemented in the future and how the city could work more strongly in a collaborative manner on the SDGs. So that would be our presentation. Thanks a lot. Back to you.
So much. Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you very much. Thank you also, Josh, for the work. I'm sorry for the issue with the mic. As mentioned, this is a work in progress. The plan is to launch this in a couple of months at the World Urban Forum. So any suggestion, inputs that you may wish to send us by email or in the chat will be extremely useful. And in particular, the input that we receive now from our panelists. The first one is the discussant, and is Emilia Seitz, the Secretary General of UCLG. Emilia doesn't really need an introduction, as everybody is well aware of the leading role that she's playing as Secretary General of UCLG in supporting cities, regions in the localization of the SDGs in the local 2030. So we are extremely glad to have Emilia with us and to have her perspective on which tools, which example, which good practice can help cities and regions in moving towards the achievement of the SDGs at the local level, and also perhaps some feedback and suggestion for the toolkit that OECD is developing. Emilia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Stefano, for the kind introduction, and greetings from New York. We are in New York with a delegation of mayors and governors, and we are trying to provide our perspective on the state of the implementation of the new urban agenda within the framework of the high-level meeting convened by the President of the General Assembly. And I am saying this because it is extremely relevant for what we are discussing today. I didn't want to join the first panel because it was very early over here, but actually I have been able to hear a good part of it finally, and it has been very interesting discussions. Look, as Secretary General of a network like United Cities and Local Governments, I am not going to fall into the trap of giving concrete examples of what is good or bad. But what I can say to you, Stefano, is that it is very, very relevant to support the dynamism and the innovation and the boldness of the local and regional level by giving visibility to what they are doing. And so I think the approach that you are taking with this toolkit is extremely relevant. It's a little bit what we have been saying in United Cities and local governments, that we need to make sure that we are not seeing the localization of the SDGs as implementing a global agenda, but that we analyze the global agenda from the bottom up. And I think the approach that you're taking here is exactly this. I think I would also, and I'm sure my colleagues from my research team working on localization and monitoring every year the progress that we make in this area, will also be very happy with the different headlines that we have chosen, and the different chapters. I think it is extremely relevant to make the links between the rural and the urban. It's extremely relevant to tackle the financial aspect, etc. So very happy to contribute from that end, and also to see many of the good examples that our membership are promoting. So what are we missing, Stefano? Why aren't we progressing like we should? And it's not only a question of financing, which it is, and we need to look at this. It's not about having available funds. It's about, why do we choose not to invest them in certain spaces, and how can we convince the national and the international levels to shift investment patterns and to prioritize other things. And when I was reflecting about this morning's discussion, what struck me is that, okay, so we all agree on the areas that we need to highlight, but we are not very concrete about how those areas are extremely linked with local service provision. And that is also the difficulty that we are finding here at the United Nations level. When we say, oh, we have seen many successes in Europe, but it's weaker in Eastern Europe and in the Middle East. I was hearing one of the speakers say that. I obviously agree with that. But why is that? Well, the reason behind it is that implementing the Sustainable Development Goals as an integral cross-sectoral approach is only feasible not only when you have the capacities as local and regional governments, because you know how to do things or you have the people, but when you have the competencies. Localization of Sustainable Development Goals is being effective in those places where it is attached to sound decentralization, to the implementation of the new urban agenda, which we have totally forgotten in this discussion, and shamefully enough, it is forgotten everywhere, quite frankly. And it's not because I am here in New York in that context now that I am saying this, but it will be critical to talk about competencies if we want to bring the localization movement further. Also, something that we have seen to our satisfaction and of partners like OECD and others is that COVID has shown us how useful many of our initiatives were at local level. But guess what? They are still being seen as temporary measures, and we are seeing them drop off now as the national frameworks, legal frameworks, change again and come to a new normality. If you can call it like that, we see that the capacities from the terms of the legal frameworks of municipalities and regions to implement certain policies, like for instance, around housing or digitalization, have gone away. So that is also something that I think we need to, that we will need to address, and that is critical for the next step of our work. I think it is important to have a toolkit like this. We have just published with UN Habitat guidelines on the voluntary local reviews. But I think we need to take it a step further, and we need to make the link with other global agendas, but the new urban agenda needs to be there. Another thought that I want to leave with you is that we need to do this from a totally renewed perspective in multi-stakeholder collaboration. And I fully agree with Guillaume in the previous panel saying, look, very often participatory processes are one-offs. This is the case for the relation between the national and the local government, like the mayor from Braga was saying, certainly, but it is also the case between local governments and their citizens. We need to actually change that, and in order to do that, we need to work in the whole context of trust and information. And from our perspective, if we want the voluntary local reviews to progress and this movement to progress from the perspective of promoting different types of policies, so not reporting on new policies, but promoting new engagement in transformative policies, we will need to approach this integrally with other stakeholders. The role of science needs to change, yes, but it needs to change not only in evaluating what cities are doing, what local and regional governments are doing, but also trying to enhance this relationship with civil society. And I am uttering here a point of concern. Many of the policies that we are praising at international level are policies that are making our members not run for election again or lose the elections. The citizens are not backing up these policies. So we also need to think about how we do that. And I am very happy to see that the city of Madrid is here with us today, because with them and with their support as part of this localization movement, we are implementing a program that highlights the need for multi-stakeholder engagement in localization. So that would be my second point. First being local service provision and decentralization are still critical, and I hope that reflects in the toolkit. And then finally, something that I think is also very critical. 2030, how should 2030 look like? Well, I hope that we would be able to solve war in a different way than we are doing it now. And I mention war not only because of the specific situation that is happening in Europe right now with the invasion of Ukraine, and the terrible consequences that it's going to have for the global system, but also because it is questioning the way that we have come to produce global agendas. It's questioning multilateralism capacities, actually. So believe me, I think Goal 16 and peace will have a very different role as we work towards 2030. And we think that if there is something that drastically needs to change as we work towards 2030, is not only the investment, yes, investment, sure, but also the way that we measure success. And measuring success will not be done by voluntary national reviews. It needs to be done by voluntary subnational reviews. And the place that these voluntary subnational reviews, that is integrating voluntary local reviews with articulated frameworks led in a countrywide movement, those voluntary subnational reviews should influence budgeting at national level. Unless we manage to do that, and this is only a beauty context where we present success and some innovation, we will not be able to progress in the movement. So forgive me, Stefano, if I have been providing inputs maybe more suited for the first panel. And thank you very much for this opportunity. Obviously, United Cities and local governments, our members and our partners, but also the Global Task Force, all the organizations that gather there, are very happy to see these new tools being developed. And we hope we can be part and parcel of the discussion there. The networked solutions that we need to give to local and regional governments are also a very important part of the advancement of the agenda. So it's not about recognizing roles only, but it's about realizing how we could scale up a lot of this innovation and how we could make permanent some of these temporary measures that remain in pilots very often. We need to make sure that they are maintained in times no matter the color of government. And the international community, the academic community, organizations like OECD and United Cities and local governments have a role to play here, and we need to take that commitment. So very happy to continue working with you. I'll stop here, Stefano, inviting you to make sure that all of these tools are showcased in our Congress in Daejeon in October. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, Emilia, for all these extremely inspiring inputs and suggestions and ideas. We'll do our best to integrate them in the toolkit, and we take your invitation to present it also in your next forum. We'll be very happy to do so. Let me now turn to the panel discussion. We have first a political representative of one of our pilot cities and regions, the city of Mannheim. So I'm very glad to introduce you to the Deputy Mayor, Diana Pressel. She's the Deputy Mayor for Citizen Services, Climate, Environment, Technical Operation of the city of Mannheim, Germany, which is again one of the city of our program, and also a city that is extremely active on the voluntary local review process. The city already did one a couple of years ago, and now is in the process to continue the implementation of the SDGs. So without further ado, Deputy Mayor, you have the floor. If you could please explain us also how these tools are useful for a city like Mannheim that is already active on the implementation of the SDGs. The floor is yours.
Stefano, thank you very much. Also that I can be part of you, and best greetings from Peter Kurz. He's not able to be here today, but I hope I can even give you an overview, and best greetings from Mannheim. Yeah, we are very honored that we are part of your program, and for me, I'm very honored to be here because in my former work at WWF 1.5 years ago, I also worked with you on other topics. So I think it's great to be with you again. From Mannheim, we implement the SDGs. That's what you already said. And maybe coming from the topic of globalization, we have about half of the percentage of the Earth's surface is urbanized, but 45% in the year of 2014, world's population were urban. So I think you see the influence of the cities on the SDGs. And that's why we started a huge process, and we used the SDGs for our strategical mission statement. That we did in a process together with the citizens and the politicians in our city, and found out of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, 7 goals that are our strategical mission statements, such as education, such as solidarity, such as climate, digitalization, cooperation internationally, etc. Yeah, these are our goals, and I think what you already heard, we use them for all our decisions. As soon as we go to the city council and do decisions, it's always named. They are the indicators for our decisions. And every year when we do our budget, they are the basic for all the decisions. So I think this is a very strong use of the Sustainable Development Goals for us. This was decided in 2019, this way of going on by the City Council, but we didn't stop by that. What we now do, well, maybe to have a look on that, we go even further. The next step was that we had the European Conference of Sustainable Cities and Towns from ICLEI here in Mannheim, and that targeted into the Mannheim message, which is about the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, and our basic line of that is the European Green Deal. because we say we have to implement it. We have to use the European Green Deal because this is the framework for Europe, and it also is has subsidies for implementation, what we really need to go this way. As a result of that, we implemented a secretary of 3 people out of our in our city, and this secretary is now developing a structure, or we are just about to finalize this structure so that it's really going into deals for sustainability, into deals of the European Green Deal, into local green deals, not only with the city, with the city itself, but also with all the citizens here. Yeah, so it's really it's supposed to be a big process in Mannheim, and for this we want to be a role model also for the Green Deal in Europe as a local Green Deal. That's how we call it. And therefore, we try to be part of the 100 climate neutral cities, which is the first big call of the European Union for the Green Deal. We don't know the decision yet whether we really will be part of that, but we still hope. And if we manage this, we have a big tool also for the implementation of our climate action plan, which we are also about to decide on. We want to decide on that in July, how we really can implement that. So what we really do is to use the Sustainable Development Goals for the local Green Deal and to use this holistic framework for our local sustainability work in Mannheim. Thank you, and I hope I could give you a quick overview on the way we work on that. Thank you.
Yes, it was really great, Deputy Mayor. Thank you so much. I think it's extremely interesting how your Mannheim is linking the SDGs to the Green Deal and to the climate agenda. It's one of the areas that it's a very useful example also for our toolkit, where we have one area where we are trying to link to promote this element of policy coherence between the different dimensions of sustainability. So this is definitely a great example for us. Let me now go to the other two, one pilot of the program, the province of Cordoba, and then the city of Madrid, that hopefully will be a pilot soon. So I will start.
Stefano,
please.
Just 1 minute. I have to leave in three minutes. Sorry for that. So there will not be able to participate in the discussion. But if you pass me the questions, I will just answer them later. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you so much. We'll
thank you very much.
To your team. Bye. So as I was saying, the next speaker in the panel is from the province of Cordoba, is Melissa Gorondi-Novak. Melissa is the Director General for Articulation and International Relations at the Ministry of Coordination at the province of Cordoba in Argentina. She is playing a key role in shaping the toolkit together with all the other pilots. So it would be great, Melissa, if in 5 minutes, given that we are running a bit out of time, you can explain which are the concrete tools that the province of Cordoba is implementing to achieve the SDGs, and also how a tool like the one of the OECD that we are basically developing together can be useful for the province. Melissa, you have the floor in 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. I'm very grateful for the invitation to be part of this 5th OECD Roundtable. I'm going to present, as Stefano said, the case of the province of Cordoba, which was part of the pilot of territorialization of SDGs led by OECD, and nowadays is part of the steering committee towards SDGs and part of this co-creation of the toolkit for the implementation of SDGs locally. But let me introduce a little bit about Cordoba. Cordoba is one of the 23 provinces in Argentina. It is the 5th largest province in the country and the second most populous province. And we are committed to the 2030 agenda since the launch of it. So the province has been working in order to build a solid base of processes that allowed the institutionalization of this agenda and its SDGs at the governmental level, but based on a multi-level and multi-stakeholder dialogue. So you're going to find this experience in this toolkit. One of it is the experience that we had carried out with OECD, which was between 2018 and 2020. We developed a process of territorialization of SDGs and its targets, jointly with a collaborative process with a private sector, the academia, and civil society. And we state that our priorities are the first 5 SDGs and the SDG number 10, taking into account that the priorities for Córdoba and for Argentina as a whole are the social agendas due to our main challenges related to poverty, inequality, the reduce of hunger, gender, equality, health, and education. And this, as I said, this territorialization process was accompanied by OECD, and the province of Córdoba became the first region in the continent of America to be part of SDG pilot. Nowadays, we share this space with Paraná, which is other region in Latin America. So we are very proud of being part of this process and to be accompanied by OECD. And another tool that you are going to find in this toolkit is this experience of developing a matrix of interrelationship between SDGs and targets as a tool to guide political strategies. And the idea is to have this tool from a comprehensive perspective that brings together all the actors that contribute to the various dimensions of local development. And in addition, another tool that we developed is that in 2020, the provincial budget was aligned to the 2030 agenda in order to recognize which and how budget programs work towards an SDG or a set of them, and what is the financial contribution of the province for sustainable development, and which are the financial challenges that we have nowadays. And we also develop a set of actions that to raise awareness and to disseminate the 2030 agenda within the government, so to government agents and to municipal agents. And all of this work is reflected in an open communication and management platform that accounts for the progress of the province towards the SDGs and the indicators that we are helping us to follow the achievement of SDGs. And everything was developed within the multi-level governance, as I said. So multi-level governance was deepened within this process from the international dimensions, working with OECD and nowadays with the United Nations, and the local dimension with the national government and municipal governments, with whom today we are carrying out a pilot jointly to territorialize SDGs in the smaller territories with also their own interest groups. And finally, we are going to present this year our first voluntary report, the VLR, to the United Nations, which is the second in the country after the city of Buenos Aires. And all of this build, as I said, a solid foundation for the agenda to be a horizon for our political actions and for there to be sufficient mechanisms to work deeply into public policy. So as Stefano said before, the main question that currently challenges us and for which we are working is to answer how to go from this concept, from this process of institutionalization to the action, to results, to show the results and how we are working towards particular SDGs which are social. For this, it is important to have these concrete tools, and in this framework, we are part of this toolkit of territorialization SDGs. And in this toolkit, we also show specific policies of concrete practical actions towards social inclusion, particularly, for example, that are based on multi-level governance. In that sense, we are currently generating a process of transformation of our political strategies, precisely based on the established priorities, the lines of actions that resulted from this territorialization process, and also taking into account the comprehensiveness of the agenda based on the analysis of this matrix of interrelationship that we developed. And of course, we cannot fail to take into account the pandemic and the importance of thinking about a transition process and a new strategy framework for the construction of a new normality that takes into account the challenges that the pandemic itself revealed. So nowadays we are implementing, as I said, concrete actions specifically to achieve well-being of all people on equal opportunities and social inclusion, with a focus on the principle of leaving no one behind. So,
thank you, Melissa. If you can conclude in 30 seconds.
Yeah. So this was the end. So there in the toolkit you can find these examples. First of all, about the institutionalization of the process of achieving SDGs in the province of Córdoba, but also on particular strategies that are focused on social inclusion in Córdoba.
Thank you very much, Melissa, again for presenting all the work that we've been doing together in these years. Let me now move directly to the last panelist, Nicolas Garbin, who is Principal Advisor, City Diplomacy and International Affairs from the city of Madrid in Spain. Madrid, as also mentioned by Emilia, is an extremely active city on localizing the SDGs. Is also in the process of preparing a voluntary local review. So it will be great to hear from Nicolas, which are the tools, the guides that City of Madrid would need to move forward with this implementation process, and also if a toolkit like the one of the OECD can help the city. Nicolas, you have the floor and 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefano. And first of all, congratulations for the work you are developing since years now and for this new step. I think it's extremely important that you are there to support the work of local authorities, but being within an intergovernmental organization. So it's really appreciated, and I would say it's needed. First, actually, I just, because so many things have been said, so I don't want actually to repeat. So I just wanted to bring let's say a perspective here. That is the following. I mean, being in a city is extremely interesting. Because actually you are really the object of the interest of all the level of governance, the other level of governance, and actors. And at the same time, you are really in the first line towards citizens. So it allows you to actually observe the evolving panorama of policy frameworks, tools, resources, etc. And especially in the last few years, we've been facing from a pandemic crisis to recovery plans to social inequalities increasing, climate change, awareness, etc. And every time, in reality, the governments, central government, propose to us new frameworks. And actually cities try, of course, depending on their capacities, and there is an enormous heterogeneity in this sense, to take these frameworks and make them on their own. So first point is the fact that local governments, cities in this case, are almost never part of the design of the policy frameworks and the financing tools provided by governments or supranational organization, but they are always requested not to implement, also because we know that the success would depend on the capacity of implementation that happen at local level. The problem is that this is becoming recurrent as the crisis, and at certain point, even cities with quite great capacity as Madrid, they are facing challenges because we don't really know to which framework stick. On this, we have to add the fact that besides the fact that we are just there for implementation and not for design, we do not really have the recognition of our role. We do not have the tools and so many times the competence, even if it's not, in my opinion, the first point, but for sure we do not have the coordination mechanisms that are necessary. So in this sense, I just want to highlight what Emilia said, that here we have a serious problem in terms of decentralization processes that are extremely heterogeneous across the different countries. Then coming to let's say the 2030 agenda and the related frameworks. But this is again a great example of it, because as we said at the beginning in the first session, it was a great opportunity, provide a common framework in the sense that we have a common language, we have also some common benchmarks, etc. Now we are in 2022, and I mean, for us cities, on one end, still there are no tools provided or endorsed by the member states that allow us actually to do a serious work in terms of demonstrate what is our contribution to the VNRs in terms of metrics, taxonomy, etc. And so this is a big issue. And plus the proliferation of frameworks that in the case of cities should have been resolved by the adoption of the new urban agenda, still, I mean, we're not there. So it's very important to recall that this week we will be celebrating in New York the high-level meeting on the new urban agenda. Unfortunately, after 60 years from the adoption in Quito, even the programs and the bodies in the UN system that were supposed to not fight for this agenda are not really were not really able to put it as the reference agenda that integrates the all different UN sustainability agenda in the system, as it was taught since the beginning. So again, what we are doing as a cities, besides the advocacy, and Emilia and the other local governments are there in New York doing this great job, is also to be practical, because at the end of the story, at city level, we have to invest a lot of time, resources, people, to work on this localization process. So it has to be useful for our citizenship, because at the end of the story, that's what matters the most to us. So that means that if there are no let's say useful monitoring frameworks, so what we are doing is that we support and we propose new tools to the different agencies. In the case, we've been developing a work called the Global Urban Monitoring Framework that try to provide a framework for monitoring for cities, localizing SDGs, but at the same time applying tools for comparability of data. Tools like the global definition of cities, where the OECD, by the way, developed together with the European Commission, World Bank, and One Habitat. So we, local governments, support global processes. At the same time, then coming to the level of our city, we have been, beside supporting global processes, this one, or the new guidelines on the voluntary local review, as Emilia mentioned, because we financially support this as a city, these two global processes. At the same time, we apply the frameworks at the local level. And I think that what the mayor of Braga said in the first part is essential. For us, European Union cities, I mean, the opportunities are even bigger. And we have tried as a city of Madrid to propose our city recovery plan. And this actually is a strategy already aligned with the SDGs since the beginning. And that goes together with a portfolio already bankable project of 4 billion euro. And besides this effort, still the work of alienation and the effort we've been doing has not been recognized by the central government, the European Union, etc. So, I mean, again, it's a lost opportunity, but still we do our work. In this sense, and this is my, let's say, my last point, that is about what we will be doing concretely and what we want also to do together with the support of OECD, again, is to support a local processes at the same time a global one. So we think that it's important to work on partnerships. I mean, this is actually let's say, the main aspect that has been working so far in terms of capacity and potential of new urban agenda 2030 SDGs, is the fact that you can actually increase partnership. Unfortunately, not really in a multi-level governance way, but yes, you can do it at the territorial level with academia, with private sector, with citizens, association, etc. So in this sense, what we wanted to develop together with the OECD, it's really a methodology that can work around a shared value partnership between public and private sectors, but based on data. And this in order actually to really enable resources, not just the public one, but also the private one, by simply recognize through metrics and taxonomy. That was very important, the question that has been done at the first session. Taxonomy are key. So to have an homogeneous reference framework in terms of methodology to recognize how the contribution of the private sector contributes to the objective of the public policies at the local level. In order for this to have a really, again, a shared value collaboration that actually do not just create a win-win situation, but also can create a new way of working together on a local level, waiting for more coordination with the other level of governance. So I think that the work we want to develop together could be a great feed to the next steps of the toolkit that you've been presenting today.
Thank you so much, Nicolas.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicolas, and we really look forward to work with the City of Madrid in this approach on how the SDGs can be a tool to connect the public and the private sector. We are running a bit late with this session, so and I don't see a question in the chat. So we'd like to thank very much all the participants for this extremely useful input. We will consider all of them for the next step of the toolkit. We will, once we have a consolidated revised draft, we'll share with all the community for feedback, inputs, and we really look forward to finalize this together. Thank you so much, Emilia, for connecting from New York. Thank you so much, Asa, for the inspiring keynote speech. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Nicolas, and thank you to the Deputy Mayor of Mannheim for the input. I will now give the floor to my colleague Rachel for the third session of this roundtable. So Rachel, you have the floor.
Hello to everybody. My name is, and thank you, Stefano. It's my pleasure to be here today and to be a part of this roundtable. My name is Rachel Morris. I'm a policy analyst in the Financing for Sustainable Development unit of the Development Cooperation Directorate at the OECD. We've been partnering with Stefano and team on decentralized development cooperation over the years, and I'm delighted to moderate this session today on city-to-city partnerships and decentralized development cooperation to address global shocks and localize the SDGs. The session today will explore how city-to-city partnerships and DDC can help respond to the current urgencies that we're facing while preparing for a more sustainable future. Last week, we released the ODA, the official development assistance figures of DAC members, and we see that ODA has reached an all-time high this year, thanks to support provided to developing countries grappling with the COVID-19 crisis. We see that in times of crisis, development cooperation and partnerships are crucial, and they play a countercyclical role, particularly when other sources of financing are in decline. With the war in Ukraine, which, as OECD has estimated, could lower global GDP growth by 1%, resources are scarce and will become even more scarce. All the more reason why today's discussion on monitoring and evaluation of city-to-city partnerships in DDC will be crucial to ensure the transparency and accountability. And notably in line with the G20 Rome high-level principles on city-to-city partnerships for localizing SDGs, which were adopted under the Italian presidency in 2021. So we're looking forward to a very important discussion today on these key issues. And I would just make a quick note to say that, of course, all are invited to continue asking questions that you may have as our panelists will present today using the Zoom Q&A function. So it is my pleasure to start our session today with a keynote speech by Ms. Anja Wagner, the head of the Federal States and Local Authorities Division of the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ of Germany. Anja, thank you so much for joining us today. You have 10 minutes, and we're very much looking forward to your inputs and insights on the importance of city-to-city partnerships and DDC, and how these can help to address some of today's most pressing global shocks and localizing the SDGs. Thank you very much. Ms. Wagner, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you so much for inviting me to this roundtable. I'm very pleased to participate. Ladies and gentlemen, cities are growing at an unprecedented pace. By 2050, more than 70% of all people will be living in cities. The dynamic path of this urbanization comes with an enormous risk as a result of a high level of resource consumption, progressing climate change. 70% of greenhouse gases and 70% of waste are produced in cities. The COVID-19 pandemic, armed conflicts in Syria, Mali, and the war in Ukraine, socio-economic crisis directly affect urban populations, destroying physical infrastructure and disrupting municipal service delivery, affecting the social fabric of local communities and harming the poorest most strongly. If these shocks cause social, economic, and ecological distress at the local level, these crises need to be addressed from the local level as well. Recovery to include local and regional governments' perspective has to include. This can be a reason for optimism as well, because one can also look at this scenario from the other side and acknowledge that urban areas are key to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. If 2/3 of all SDG targets can only be reached in and through cities, if 60% of climate-related investments are made by local and regional governments, if around 70% of global gross domestic product is generated in cities, offering economic opportunities also for vulnerable populations, it becomes clear that decentralized development cooperation can help harnessing and leveraging local transformative potential. To this end, we need to take a close look at what local and regional governments are already doing to foster sustainable development, what strengths DDC can build on, what targeted support is needed in order to strengthen these processes. These investments in financial and human resources, in peer learning and co-creation, in commonly shared visions and locally adapted strategies will pay off, because nearly all major issues for the global future will be determined in cities and regions. The 2030 Agenda offers a compelling narrative as well as a common ground for prioritizing action addressed through DDC. SDG 11 calls for sustainable cities and communities. For this aim to be realized, many other SDGs need to be addressed.
Most of all, if this action is taken as a reaction to crisis and disaster. Infrastructure destroyed by floods should be rebuilt, taking natural hazards emerging from climate change into account. A peaceful society builds on reliable, strong, transparent, and accountable local institutions, because they can help resolve conflicts of interest and respond to developments that might cause divisions in local society. Because the potential is huge, we must be mindful of the challenges with which local governments have to meet, especially in small and medium-sized cities. First, city authorities and local governments only have limited scope of action. Often they cannot respond adequately to rapidly rising demand for housing, jobs, and basic services. And in case of rebuilding after sudden onset, they must prioritize among contradictory, but each in itself indispensable needs. Second, they often lack the necessary knowledge or do not have enough well-trained workers, especially when it comes to complex endeavors such as strategic urban planning and the management of large projects. Third, the rapid process of urbanization requires high level of financial resources. Cities cannot meet these needs on their own. It is estimated that the annual global urban investment gap alone amounts to $1 trillion. For this reason, decentralized development cooperation uses the power of cities as a catalyst by fostering city-to-city partnerships and cooperation among local governments. It implements peer learning mechanisms as a means of addressing global challenges through mutual learning. And it aims at financing partnership projects as well as integrating partnership networks into the wider bilateral and multilateral aid schemes. It is for this reason that DDC has to aim at giving local and regional government a voice in multilateral processes and fora, following the truth that we should not speak about them, but with them. This is why BMZ supports the participation of German cities in this kind of OECD processes and supports voluntary local reviews to the UN HLPF. Exchange starts from knowledge. Exchange on equal terms starts with knowledge about each other and sharing good examples. Working together to achieve the 2030 Agenda and its SDGs through collaboration across all levels of governments requires a good understanding of interaction, strengths, and weaknesses. And most importantly, it needs a shared understanding of a global agenda at the local and regional level. This shared understanding emerges from joint processes to concretely localize global agendas. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wagner, for the very compelling presentation made on the importance of municipalities in achieving the 2030 agenda and the position that Germany has taken in helping to support them in carrying out voluntary local reviews and other processes, including with the OECD. We have, I think, now some time for Q&A. I am not seeing a question in the chat for now. Perhaps we can let's just give a minute or two, but otherwise I have a question perhaps I can ask if you would allow. The points that you make around the importance of the 70-70-70 formula, I think this is quite important, and I'm wondering in terms of the kinds of expertise that German cities are having in carrying out the kinds of climate-related agendas, how you see an opportunity for furthering decentralized development cooperation, and the other kinds of expertise that Germany has in ensuring, for example, that those countries that are falling behind following COVID-19, where we see a rise in poverty, the poorest countries, how this can help ensure that they're on track as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, we experience at the moment concerning the Ukraine war that how active cities are and how impressive it is what they are doing. I mean, Leipzig by its own provided like 9 million euro to support their partner communities. And this is really an impressive, very impressive sign. And I think it shows also how the different levels of government can work together. I mean, not only in regarding countries like Ukraine, where we have a war, but also in like other partner countries, because I think what's the strength of the local level, especially in the partnership cooperation, is that they concretely know the needs of their partner community, and they can concretely provide what is needed in the partner community. Whereas with the bilateral aid, we are on a different layer. We are on like the national level, and it's more on the like structural level. So on the one hand side, like on the local level, you can provide very concrete help, but you can also, it's not just the concrete help, it's also, it can also have like a further, it can also be bigger, you know, because other communities are copying it. And this is what we are also, why we are fostering the peer-to-peer learning so much, because the partnerships can learn from each other. So they don't have to invent things by themselves, but they can take the ideas. So this is also very inspiring about working with the local level, because you have so many inspired people and very good ideas, and you can copy them, and with copying you can have like a big, very creative and great effect. And this is what we are so fascinating also about this kind of cooperation, and this is why we support it so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Really, I think it's been a very interesting and enriching presentation. We're very, very grateful to have your inputs today. I think in the interest of time then, and I haven't seen other questions, I will move then to our panelists. Thank you very much to all for your participation today. We have 4 panelists. So we have Andrea Ferrari Bravo, Head of Sector of the Civil Society and Local Authorities of the DG INPA at the European Commission. We have Xavier Dargov, who's the Deputy Delegate for External Action of Local Governments at the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs in France. And Marie Rodriguez, the Project Officer for the Delegation for the External Action of Local Governments, also at the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs in France. And last but not least, we have Nancy Mathis, who's the Policy Officer at the Flanders Chancellery and Foreign Affairs at the region of Flanders in Belgium. We thank you all very much for joining us today. We're looking very much forward to hearing first from Mr. Bravo. We're very pleased to be working, our colleagues working with you on this subject of monitoring and evaluation of city-to-city partnerships. And we're interested to hear more about what the European Commission is working on with some examples, including on the OECD EC project on the city-to-city partnerships. So thank you very much. You have 5 minutes and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rachel. Good afternoon. And thank you for the invitation and congratulations for the initiative. So as you said, my intervention will focus on our city-to-city partnership program. We, through different call for proposal, we are implementing 57 city-to-city partnerships with a total budget of 165 million. And this program is our main political engagement on city-to-city cooperation. So the aim of this program is to build partnerships for integrated urban development among local authorities in Europe and partner countries by supporting the 3 dimensions of sustainability, social and environmental and economic. and propose a long-term approach. The program, the main feature of the program is that it offers a space for the development of demand-driven partnerships between municipalities from Europe and the rest of the world to collaborate on areas of mutual interest in relation to integrate urban development. I'm very happy to see the city of Madrid, the city with us today. They are implementing 2 of these 57 partnership, one with Dakar and the other one I think is with Cape Verde. And the recent experience with the COVID response and other climate emergency action that we lived, we see that one of the main local governance challenges is the difficulty of working across tiers of government. And in a survey by the Committee of Regions and OECD, more than 300 European cities, the 70% of these European cities said that the lack of coordination with other level of government, vertical, horizontal coordination, was one of the main challenges they experienced during the emergency. 1/3 of the respondents also said that cross-border cooperation and communication and information sharing between subnational governments was another big challenge. So, under circumstances of extreme insecurity and without a clear roadmap for action, communication and information sharing between cities and regions can make a huge difference. In our city-to-city partnership program, a number of European local authorities are involved in development cooperation through their own direct decentralized cooperation relationship through their networks at international level and EU funding. Such kind of decentralized cooperation shares European expertise and know-how in key sectors with local authorities in partner countries. I was making the example of the city of Madrid implementing one of the partnership in, for example, with Dakar in the governance of energy transition. And while our city-to-city partnership program cannot provide official responses to coordination challenges, it provides a wide range of informal support, including promoting solidarity between subnational governments, providing platforms for information sharing, facilitating knowledge and experience exchange, supporting cities, region twinning and partnership. And for example, our program is contributing to mitigate the impact of current emergencies by developing a community of practitioners. And in this framework, we have identified the need to develop an homogeneous monitoring and evaluation system to measure the contribution of each city-to-city partnership to the achievement of the SDGs, and analyze the partnership effectiveness. And for this purpose, we request OECD to analyze, identify the right condition for the contribution of city partnership to SDGs, and to develop a set of key indicators. One for measure the contribution of each city-to-city partnership project to the overall partnership program, and the other one to analyze and evaluate to what extent the partnership are performing in localizing the SDGs. So these two set of indicators will feed into the main analysis and in the final official report. And this collaboration with OECD is aligned with the G20 high-level principles on city-to-city partnership, in particular the principle number 5 on monitoring and evaluation. So to conclude, the city-to-city initiative and its monitoring is our commitment for helping national and subnational governments to accelerate achieving SDGs in developing countries, even in a context of complex emergency as the one we are experiencing now. And thank you, Rachel, and thank you all for your attention.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Bravo, for those remarks. I think it's quite impressive to see the work that's been carried out at the EC with the 57 city-to-city partnerships. It's quite a few, and of course, the work that's being done to help to understand how those partnerships are addressing the challenges that we face today is quite important, especially in terms of understanding how we can harmonize our monitoring and evaluation. Really great work and a very interesting presentation. With this, I would like to move now to our next panelist. Our next panelists, sorry, Mr. Dargov and Mary Rodriguez, who will be providing us with some examples of how the French system is supporting subnational governments in their decentralized development cooperation activities, and very much looking forward to your views. Again, 5 minutes, and the floor is yours. Thank you. Oh, I believe you're on mute.
Mute, yeah. Do you hear me? Yeah.
And I think your screen is.
Okay, you want me to be like this, yeah?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so I put, sorry for disturbing. Yeah, thank you, Rachel, for your invitation for the French side to explain a bit what we're doing at the OECD. Because I believe we're quite specific in foreign ministries in Europe, at least, and probably also if we include the US, in having this directorate manned by and women by, if I may, by 10 people, 10 officers who are in charge of promoting cooperation between the French local authorities and the local authorities in the rest of the world. So we see very much decentralized development cooperation as a part of the French diplomacy, and together with, let's say, the state diplomacy and probably the parliamentary diplomacy. Then we have also the local authority diplomacy, and so through our directorate, we very much encourage these sort of links with between French local authorities and others. And we're doing this in doing some advocacy work, of course. And so we have seminars and webinars and everything of that sort. We also, and the main tool, if I may, is our different calls for proposals, whereby we encourage and we co-finance projects initiated by French local authorities with their partners in the world. So we run this annually or over 3 years, and we finance a few millions in this process. And so we've got geographic call for proposal with let's say historical partners such as Morocco, Senegal, Tunisia, Lebanon, or with Palestine or Quebec, and even Mexico. But we also have thematic call for proposal, on sports and development. We had one on climate, of course. Now we've launched a new one on gender equality, and we also have a long-standing one which is about youth mobility. So, we very much encourage French local authorities to establish projects, and we co-finance this. And of course, since 2019, all the projects submitted to us by French local authorities have to have an impact or to concern or to be connected with the SDGs, of course. So in this process, we very much encourage, the implementation of the SDGs, both in France, but even more so in overseas in the contact with the other partners. Now, this idea of having the SDGs as let's say the stumbling blocks of all the projects is also now encompassed in the new law that was passed last year, which is our new development law relative to solidarity development and the fight against global inequalities, whereby the Agenda 2030 is now officially the new framework for French development policies. So that was the old law, which was probably 20 years old, was revamped in this new law that was passed last year by Parliament. And of course, Agenda 2030 is at the center of this. Secondly, in this new law, which very much encouraged the DDC and Decentralized Development Corporation, also this new law includes the obligation for all local governments of more than 50,000 inhabitants to indicate in their strategies how their action contribute to the 2030 agendas and how they implement the SDGs. So that's now a legal obligation for big cities of 50,000 inhabitants. And of course, as well, the funds dedicated to us, to the DAOCT, and also to the AFD, the French Development Agency, have doubled over the last 5 years. So that shows very much how France and the French government is trying to encourage DDC. And also, I think an interesting point of this new law is the establishment of a new evaluation committee, which is will jointly be done by auditing office, the Cour des Comptes, and the Parliament. So this is the introduction of evaluation criteria at let's say parliamentary level. So that's quite something significant for the DDC. Now, in terms of how we try to respond to global crisis, I think that was another topic that was that needs to be discussed today. Of course, we during the recent crisis of, let's say, COVID, we tried very much with COVID-19. We tried very much to encourage the local authorities to develop projects, in line with the response, in terms of health, in terms of education, or anything you want. So we tried to encourage through call for proposal to encourage all the French local authorities to develop projects with their counterparts. And it was quite a success. We were a bit worried that because of the COVID, everything would be stopped. But in fact, we monitored that local authorities were very much, let's say, positive and trying to come and managed to come up with new solutions, new projects to help their counterparts to develop things like finding digital solution or localizing agriculture and economy, or there were also some assistance for medical supplies, sanitation equipment, on these sort of things, and also like the example that was shared about hotlines to fight domestic violence. That because of the confinement, that people had to. Some people went crazy at home, so there was also something that something that French local authorities tried to share with all their partners. Now, another example of crisis management was the case of Ukraine, and we, together with our crisis management center here at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we launched a fund specifically for the French local authorities, whereby they could contribute to this fund, and it has been a success so far. So then the money that is provided by the local authorities is channeled through our crisis management center to help Ukraine and also the neighboring countries But and this is in addition to, of course, direct links and direct assistance that the authorities have provided to their counterparts. And I think now I will very briefly give the floor to Mary and my colleague, and she will talk a bit about monitoring and evaluation as well. So Mary, maybe you can.
If we could keep it to 1 minute or so.
Yeah. She will be very short. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, it will be very short. Just to complete a bit, we are also collecting data of French local governments to see how much they are contributing to official development assistance. And we have an open data map on partnerships about decentralized cooperation that is called the Atlas of Decentralized Cooperation. And thanks to this data collection process, we are analyzing these data annually to support the work of French local governments, representatives, and the states within the National Commission for Decentralized Cooperation. And this work is about reflecting and rethinking decentralized cooperation and its impact on the SDGs, or to respond to global crisis. So maybe finally, it's obviously we are also gathering and examining the reports on the execution of projects that we are co-financing. That is a key component of our work to ensure that the support, national support to these initiatives is efficient. Yes, and I say at your disposal to complete.
Excellent. Thank you very much, both to Mr. Dargov and Ms. Rodriguez for excellent explanation of the French work and the new law, the new development law, as well as the response to COVID-19, Ukraine, and the information provided on the data map, the Atlas of Decentralized Cooperation, very useful tools. Now I would very much welcome our last panelist of the day, Ms. Mathis. Please, we are looking forward to hearing your views of the region of Flanders and how Flemish municipalities are working to advance city-to-city partnerships and decentralized development cooperation. Thanks very much. You have the floor.
Many thanks, Rachel, and good afternoon, everyone. Well, I will briefly tell you about the key messages, the characteristics of Flanders' model of decentralized development cooperation. These are first geographic and thematic concentration. So we focus on a few specific sectors like sexual and reproductive health and rights, agriculture and food security. In partnership with specific countries, Malawi, Mozambique, and South Africa. To deliver impact, we try to find suitable niches within chosen sectors, not only in terms of effectivity, but also in terms of innovation and risk management. And then a second characteristic of this Flanders model of decentralized development cooperation is a two-tiered system approach. So we work not only through national governments, but also through local and regional governments, which is very important, through a focus of subsidiarity. So it means that the central authority should only perform those tasks which cannot be performed at a more local level. We also focus on service delivery and multi-stakeholder dialogue. And the third key message is that we focus on specific SDGs with also increasing support from the provinces, cities, and municipalities in Flanders. Maybe I can give you a few examples to make it more concrete. In Malawi, for instance, so the national government of Malawi has issued a national land law that also gives women access to buy and possess land for agriculture. But Flanders does not only support the national government, but also 2 districts, which are rural areas, to implement the national law on a more local level. And this is absolutely necessary because there are still a lot of traditional hierarchical systems in Malawi, which exclude, for instance, women from having access to the possession of land. So Flanders supports these decentralization efforts of the government of Malawi within the agriculture sector through a project implementation that is more responsive to local community needs, so that women get access to, and through direct district funding, in order to improve coordination and increase the overall impact of the agricultural interventions in the districts. And then another example is Mozambique. Well, Flanders does not only support the National Ministry of Health, but it also supports directly the province of Tete to strengthen its health policy on a provincial level. That has been a growth process from national support and support of projects carried out by private organizations like NGOs, schools, universities, etc. And UN, of course, to direct support of the capacity building and strengthening of local authorities. But this process implies certain risks, of course, and that is why it has been a slow and careful process, and monitoring and evaluation play a key role in it. For example, in Flanders, we made specific agreement, in Malawi, we made specific agreements with the Ministry of Finance to have access to audit data, also on a local level, and we can also carry out own audits there on a more local level in exchange of direct funding from Flanders on a more local level, so the district, the direct district funding. Maybe I can also tell you something about the challenges for this decentralized development cooperation. Well, one of the challenges is that, for instance, Mozambique is a very centralized country, so they have no tradition of decentralization, but it is absolutely necessary to be able to implement policy in the whole country to work on a more local level, because it's a huge country with extensive rural areas. So this is a challenge to decentralize, to work on a decentralized way. Then capacity building is another challenge. Well, the highest educated staff or personnel is situated mostly in the capital of our partners, and on a more local level, people are often less higher educated. So it means that capacity building on a local level is absolutely necessary. And this is another challenge. Maybe I can also tell you something about how we try to deal with crisis. Well, we try to support local communities to become more resilient, to be able to absorb shocks and to deal with crises like COVID-19 and now the upcoming food crisis due to the Ukraine war. For example, in the new country strategy for Mozambique, we added a new goal to build capacity to better cope with health crises like COVID-19 or Ebola. We focus on disaster preparedness and prevention. This awareness was already there for about 10 years or so due to climate change, but now we are trying to strengthen it and to accelerate it. In Flanders, we also have this Flemish resilience that is then focused on a sustainable recovery of the economy and society in Flanders from COVID-19, which is co-financed by Europe. I would like to tell you something more about our city-to-city partnerships and decentralized development cooperation. Well, it's true that cities, they face similar challenges all over the world, growing inequality, climate change, housing and mobility, like Anja Wagner said. Well, but these city-to-city partnerships, they are a unique way of development cooperation, and therefore they can provide also a unique way of dealing with crisis. By focusing on exchange between peers and learning from peers. And this is also what Anja told us. This is extremely important, this exchange of good practices. and therefore the strengthening of capacity building and local governance. Because capable staff and politicians and effective government structures are the basis for qualitative and inclusive service delivery to citizens and to tackle urban challenges. What is also very important in this story is the use of the common framework of the SDGs for facilitating and strengthening the city-to-city partnerships. Let me give you a few examples from Flanders. Well, the VVSG, that is the Association of Flemish Cities and Municipalities, will in the coming years set up SDG partnerships between Flemish municipalities and their peers abroad, with a focus on Benin and Rwanda, based on a concrete challenge, for example, local food systems, SDG 2 and 12. These are short-term partnerships of approximately 2 years that can be established, and they do not only provide opportunities for the Flemish municipalities to get involved in international cooperation in an accessible manner, but it also allows a focused exchange between peers where both can learn. Both partners can learn from each other in coping with all kinds of problems and crises. Another example of the city-to-city partnership is the city of Lommel in Flanders and Ongwediva in Namibia. I hope I pronounce it correctly. They used the SDGs to identify the themes for their new 5-year program of cooperation. So which SDGs were covered or not, which SDGs they wanted to highlight, such as SDG 4, the exchange between schools, and sustainable tourism, SDG 8. That's another example. Now we also face a lot of challenges regarding this city-to-city partnerships, and one of them is the necessity to deepen support for small and medium-sized municipalities. There is need for to support these municipalities in particular. So they can also engage in city-to-city cooperation and strengthen their partnerships and benefit more from peer-to-peer exchange and capacity building. And in these associations of local governments, they play an important role, as well as European, national and regional governments support. From Flanders, for instance, we do so. We provide financial support to the VVSG and VVP. The VVSG, we give them a yearly operating subsidy in the context of a covenant, and also a project grant for their Week of the Sustainable Municipality. That is for all municipalities, so also the smaller ones, because the overall goal of these subsidies is that all Flemish cities and municipalities increasingly will make the transition to a cohesive, sustainable policy that contributes to international justice, with the Agenda 2030 as a frame of reference. Then another.
Ms. Mathis, if we might
have to conclude. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. I just wanted to say, monitoring evaluation is another challenge that we try to deal with it. It's not self-evident. Okay. Thank you very much. And sorry for taking your time.
No, thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. We've just it's over, and we have concluding remarks at the end. So again, a big thanks to all of our panelists. I see we have a question. Unfortunately, I don't know if we'll have a time to address. It's for Mr. Dargov from Ms. Adriana Domingos from Parana, asking if you could share a bit more on the Corps de Compte activities and the evaluation committee. I think so. Perhaps I think for some information is provided, contact information. We can help put you guys in touch so that you can discuss more even after the session. Again, I want to thank our panelists, Mr. Bravo, Mr. Dargov, Madame Rodriguez, and Ms. Mathis for your excellent presentations, and again for sharing your tools and experiences, which will very much help our work as we go forward together with the city-to-city partnership work. With that, thank you all again, and I hand the floor back over to Stefano to conclude the roundtable. Thank you. Stefano, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for the great moderation of the session. Really 3 minutes to explain briefly the next step of this of our work. But before, I would like to really thank all the speakers of this roundtable and all the participants for being so active in terms of question and inputs through the chat. In the 3 minutes left, really three messages. The 3 sessions of the roundtable are really highlighting the main current areas of work of the OECD program on a territorial approach to the SDGs. So in terms of next step, what we are going to do is on SDGs and on the SDGs as a framework for COVID-19 recovery and strategy. We will continue to support cities and regions and national government as pilot of our program, also linking this to the Ukrainian crisis. And we are going to expand and develop new surveys to collect data information as we did with the Committee of Region, perhaps also with new partners like SDSN. In terms of the toolkit, we will also contribute. The toolkit that we present in session 2, the draft, will also contribute to this discussion on the SDGs and COVID-19 in cities and regions. The next step for the toolkit will be to discuss this with our member country at the Working Party on Urban Policy, the 9th of May. And then we are going to, in parallel, we're going to finalize it, including with all the input that we received today from you. And we'll share a final draft for comments with all our community of stakeholders on localizing the SDGs. And we are going to launch it at the World Urban Forum. Finally, on C2C partnership and decentralized development cooperation, after supporting the Italian G20 presidency in drafting the high-level principle, as mentioned by Andrea from the European Commission, we are now developing this evaluation framework on C2C partnership together with the European Commission. And this will be completed and launched by the end of the year. And on C2C partnership and decentralized development cooperation, we also have a big program currently with the German government, where we are doing 2 things. One is a national review of Germany on decentralized development cooperation with some policy assessment and recommendation to the federal government, to the states, and to the municipality on how to increase the impact of decentralized development cooperation in Germany. So we'll share this, the result of this work during the year, and if other countries are interested in this sort of collaboration, of course, we are very happy. And finally, with Germany, we're also going to develop a global policy toolkit with concrete example and good practice on how to implement decentralized development cooperation. For this, we are probably going to launch a sort of call for good practice, and therefore we will be in touch with all of you. 30 seconds to conclude now. I really would like to thank all the team, the OECD team, in particular Sojin, Lawrence, Joshua, Aline, Samantha, Vincent, Dunya, Lucy, and Rachel, among others, for this, for organizing the roundtable and for helping helping today. Let's continue the conversation with the social media, also through the OECD Local. And finally, the webinar will be recorded, and we are going to make it available in the next few days. So thank you again to everybody for participating, and see you at the next OECD Roundtable on cities and regions for the SDGs. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Okay.